Hello and welcome back. I haven't done a wrap up yet this year because in January I only read 4 books, and then in February I had a really great reading month, so I wanted to combine the 2 months together and talk about all 12 books and the manga that I've read so far this year. First, I want to start off with something that has become very near and dear to my heart. I actually read this manga at the beginning of January, and it's what I went into 2026 with. And I knew I liked the story, but now I'm like fully in love with the story. And that series is none other than Chainsaw Man by Tatsuki Fujimoto. Oh my gosh. I don't even know where to begin with this series because most people probably see it and think it is just a mess, and it truly is. But for something as corny as like a chainsaw looking guy, like a dude who's actually a demon and devil hybrid with chainsaws coming out of his head, you don't think it would have any depth or nuance, and it's just like a bunch of wild, like horrific, beat up scenes. This story is one of the deepest things I've ever read in my entire life. I read so much of it in January. But my journey started with Chainsaw Man back in like 2023 when I actually watched the first season of the anime, which was really good. And then I, didn't engage with it for a really long time. Then the movie, the Reze arc came out, and I was like, oh, I haven't thought about Chainsaw Man in a while. Let me go and watch that movie. And I watched the movie and my jaw was literally on the floor because it was so good. And everyone's been saying such good things about the movie. And then I realized, I'm like, if it's another 3 years before I find out what happens next, I'm going to lose my mind. I need to know what happens. Thus, I then jumped in and read volumes 7 through 17 in 1 month, and over the course of 2 weeks, actually. And oh my gosh, my breath was taken away because this story just blew me out of the water. We're following our main character by the name of Denji, and he grew up in a very, very tough situation. Like, this poor kid, he basically has no family that's left living, and he has to live while he's paying off the debt that his dad has accrued with the Yakuza, which are like the Japanese mafia. And it's the classic tale of he makes enough money to barely get by, and then like with interest and all the things you have to buy, he has like no money left over. He literally lives in a shack, and I just feel so bad for him because he's so stunted as like a 16-year-old emotionally because his world sucks, But he does have a little hope in his life, and that is his dog friend Pochita. And Pochita's like this really, really cute orange dog, and they have a bond together. But what happens is they eventually get into like a contract situation where Pochita gives Denji his heart, and then Denji inherits Pochita's power, which is the chainsaw devil part of it all. This story made me cry, especially towards the end of part one. Part one of the manga is volumes 1 through 11, and I was sobbing from like 9, 10, 11. I was not well, and it was so good. And I am now collecting all of the manga books because this story just meant so much to me. There are like a lot of trigger warnings, but it is a incredibly nuanced and complex story about like childhood trauma and manipulation and exploiting people, as well as finding purpose in life and what that means depending on the person. It's like fun and fast paced, but at the same time it will slow down and rip your heart out. If you've read it, please let me know. So now we're going to go through books I read in January. The first book I started off the year with was a nonfiction, aside from Chainsaw Man, very different. This is The Secret History of the Rape Kit, and it's a true story. I learned so much from this book. It was really fascinating. If you are a woman, you're going to be angry in every single capacity while you're reading this book. But this details like the unknown history of how a kit was developed in order to provide evidence to prove that a rape had happened to someone, which is still a wild concept that we have to have proof for that to happen. But this story follows like the female inventor who makes this, and it's her journey with that, but she doesn't get the recognition she deserves. So this book is kind of like an homage to her and telling you all of the gritty details behind this story. I thought it was really well written, and I think it is an essential read, especially if you like knowing about like female history that may not be like public knowledge, I thought this was really great. After that, I read C.G. Drew's second novel, which is Hazel Thorn, and this is a young adult horror book, and it's botanical horror. We're following our main character, Evander, and Evander lives in this like estate, this very like gardeny gothic type estate, and his like rival and childhood friend sort of situation is Lori, and Lori's family is actually the one that owns this estate, but Lori's grandfather, who becomes Evander's caretaker, wants to give Evander the inheritance instead of Lori. And then all these other family members are coming to the estate to try to get into Evander's good graces in order to get that inheritance. And where the horror aspect comes in is the garden that surrounds the estate is coming alive, essentially. Like, it hungers and it wants blood, and it's so viscerally disgusting the way that C.G. Drew's writes. I love C.G. Drew's writing style so much because it is so vivid. You can get a perfect image in your head, and the way they'll describe things is like very abstract, but in a beautiful lyrical way where it still makes sense. And that is a true talent, honestly. They would do it with like the simplest things, like a stomach ache or like a headache, or like they're eating food or something. It just, all the mundane things were written in such this like rich way that I really, really loved with the story. I didn't quite as love this one as much as Don't Let the Forest In, but Don't Let the Forest In is like the perfect young adult book in my mind. So this was absolutely excellent. I've already recommended it to a lot of people. I finally finished Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, and oh my gosh, it was so good. 5 stars. It was my favorite book I read in January. I finally got through it, and it was so good. It took me months, almost a year to get through it, but it was so worth it. I really, really loved this book, especially the last 150 pages. I was wondering how Brandon Sanderson was going to bring all of the characters together, and he did so in a way that just made sense, and it told so much about their characters, and he set it up perfectly to go into Words of Radiance, which is the second book. I love all of the characters. I love Caladan. I love Dalinar. I love Adolin. I hate Sadeas, but he's a great character, and Yasna is so interesting too. Shalana is an interesting character, even though she's incredibly flawed. Like, there are all these amazing things that are like, set up in this book, and like the payoff at the end was great, and now I'm so excited to continue. So I'm waiting for my audiobook to come in for Words of Radiance so that I can do the immersion reading for that, and I'm so excited. The final book that I read in January, I read this for 2 reasons. One, I was kind of craving true crime stories in a way after reading the Secret History of the Rape Kit, but I didn't know what like new age crime fiction was necessarily like. And this book was actually recommended to me by one of my colleagues that I work with, and she said it would be a good book to recommend to even like younger audiences that are interested in true crime. So this book is called The Idaho 4, An American Tragedy, and it's by James Patterson. But the way that this book was written was actually something that I really enjoyed. It focused much more on the people who were killed like during their lifetime, and less on like how the murder actually happened. This book was such a human-focused book that it made it very palatable for me. It was still hard to read, don't get me wrong. The other thing that I really loved about this book is we got to see so much of the family members involved in this, and a lot of like the aftermath of it leading up to the trial, and how family members felt, and all these sorts of things. So I thought this book was really solid and well done. It had a lot of love and care put into it. And if you don't know what the story is, this happened in like 2021, 2022, in the last like 5 years. 4 students at the University of Idaho were murdered in their on-campus house. It's one of those things where you'd think nowadays that people wouldn't be able to get away with those sorts of things, and it took them an excruciatingly long time to find out who the killer actually was and everything too. But yeah, 4 college students were just plucked right out of their bright futures and livelihood and everything, and they had a lot going on. They were really good friends, and it was an absolute tragedy, exactly how the title describes it. Overall, I liked it. I I'm not one of those people that's going to sit and consume true crime 24/7 either, but sometimes it is interesting to see how those stories progress. Next up is an arc that I read, and this book is by Natalie Sue. She is the author of I Hope This Finds You Well, which was my favorite book that I read last year. So this book is You'll Love It Here. This is Natalie Sue's sophomore novel, and it's coming out in August. So I got a very early edition of the book, which I am super duper thankful for. Thank you, NetGalley, and whatever people decided to bless me with this book. I really enjoyed the story overall. I read it at the end of my snow day vlog, so just kind of reiterating what I said there. I thought that there were a lot of things in the story that we didn't necessarily need for the purpose of stakes. I think there was just a little bit too much going on, and I would have liked to focus more on like the relationships building, because in the story we're following our main character Mona, and Mona has a, like, for lack of a better word, I've been around teens a lot lately, a crash out at work with a huge client, and kind of as punishment and to give her time to grieve the loss of her father, because she just lost her dad like months ago or something. Work gives her like paid leave. They're like, you need to just go and you need to take care of yourself for about a month. Go spend that time doing things. She's always been like a workaholic, so it's very hard for her to separate. But what's going on is at the building that she lives at, there was an incident that happened, and then her landlord ends up in the hospital, and her landlord decides to entrust Mona and her daughter with taking care of the building while she is recovering. There is a lot of talks about like a bigger corporation coming in and taking out this old apartment building. There's a lot of conversation about like, huge businesses and like the small family owned businesses, like the mom and pops, and what you do about that. There were a lot of good things I think Natalie Sue was trying to explore with this book. I just think that it got to be a little too much towards the end. And like the whole purpose of her being Mona, kind of taking over the role of landlording was so that she could develop like the relationships with the people in the building. That was like the whole gimmick of the book, was like she learns about like these quirky people that she actually shares a building with, and she becomes friends with them. And while I feel like that was carried out okay with Mona and this other character, Jane, I think it was a little lackluster and rushed in a few of the other friendships too. I don't know. I just feel like this book didn't quite hit exactly what I thought it was going to deliver. I still enjoyed it. I would still recommend it to people. It still had some parts where I was like holding my chest, because she knows, Natalie Sue knows how to write in a way that elicits such emotion from me. But I definitely still prefer I Hope This Finds You Well. So if I had to recommend one, I would go with that one. Next, I read a slew of YA novels that have black protagonists or protagonists of color. And so the first one I read is The Field Guide to the North American Teen by Ben Felipe. This book was actually pretty good. It was better than I thought it was going to be. And, I've definitely heard the name of the title before and everything. It was available in audio, so I said, let's give it a try, especially because February was Black History Month, and I want to make sure I'm, being cognizant of that, not only during February, but for the entirety of the year, to read diverse voices. And so we follow our main character, Norris. Norris is originally from Canada, and he is a black young man going into his junior year of high school, and his mom gets a professor job at the University of Texas. So they move to the US, and he has to finish out his last 2 years of school in a completely different space, make completely new friends. It's a different climate, both socially and literally, when he goes. And it's his story of kind of realizing he's got a lot of room to grow for himself and what it means to make friends and build relationships. And like the whole premise of the book kind of is that when he gets there, the counselor gives him a notebook and kind of tells him like, this is your field guide, and you can like write down all of your experiences and catalog it, and it's a good coping mechanism, for moving farther away. And he does. And it comes back to kind of bite him after a little while because he writes in a very frank way. So it's just interesting to see his character progression, and I really appreciated the ending of this book too. If you've read it, you would probably know why I'm saying that. But overall, I thought this book was pretty solid. Like, I would recommend it to a handful of kids. Next, I read a book that I probably should have read when I was a teen myself, but I really enjoyed this one too. This is A Very Large Expanse of Sea by Taraha Mafi. This follows a main character right after 9/11 happened. So this book was published in like the 2010s, but it takes place in the early 2000s, and we're following our main character as she goes to a predominantly white school, newer school, and she's navigating all the ups and downs that comes with being an Islamic woman in that time period. She deals with so much xenophobia, and her identity is not respected. Like, it is honestly appalling to think that that's how we've treated people. And I know a lot of this story also comes from Mafi's like personal experiences and people that she knows. So I think this book was a wonderful perspective, especially as someone who has never had to think of that problem. Reading it from another person's perspective and everything gave me so much insight to what that would have been like, and I can really empathize with them and sympathize for the terrible circumstances that they were put in. Also, with this book, the one thing that I really latched onto was there's a second character, and he kind of becomes like the love interest for our main girl. I'm forgetting both of their names right now, so I feel very bad about that. But he is like a basketball star, and it tackles like the pressures of young athletes so well, to the point where I was like almost getting choked up because I have been there and felt that before. And the way that Mafi wrote that just felt so visceral and real. And it is just so weird thinking about how our society puts like young athletes on a pedestal, and how some kids have to afford college by playing the sport. Like, it was so weird, but she tackled that in such a nuanced way. I think Mafi hit on the larger themes in this book really, really well. It is just like a coming of age story, and there's like not a super large overarching plot, but it didn't need that. This book had a lot of commentary, and I'm really appreciative of every single bit that it had to say. Next up is another book by a Black author. This book is called Promise Boys by Nick Brooks. And overall, I thought this book was okay. We follow three main perspectives, and it's three boys of color that are attending this academy known as Promise Academy or Promise Prep Academy. And what happens is one day their principal winds up dead, and a couple of them are being blamed for the murder of him. So we follow this story in motion, and it's told through not only interview styles with different people that were semi close to the situation that happened, but we're following the three characters through their like reaccounting of that day, as well as like them dealing with the social media that came after, blaming them and like causing a lot of harm by the things that people say afterwards. Well, I just thought this book was fine. I'm probably not going to think on it too much, and I feel like the reveal at the end was a little obvious in my opinion. But I think this book is really good for young adult readers that are maybe looking to get back into reading, and they need something that has like a bit of substance to it as well. So I thought overall this book was okay. I liked it. Next book on the list is the final young adult book that I read in my slew of young adult audiobooks, and that is This Is My America by Kim Johnson. I really do love the way that Kim Johnson writes. It is very reminiscent of Nick Stone. If you've ever read any of her novels, that's like Dear Martin, Dear Justice, Dear Manny, all of those books. This definitely felt like if you loved those, you should read this. We are following our main character, Tracy, and she is dealing with her father who is on death row for a murder he didn't commit. And nobody will believe his innocence, and she has reached out to multiple like organizations that usually help people of color that are innocent and can't prove it themselves, and she's just heard crickets. And she has less than a year to figure this out. It gets even worse when one of her classmates is killed, and her brother is pegged as like the prime suspect of it when she also believes in his innocence. It was just it's always good to read novels that are characters who are different from you, because you learn a whole new perspective and your empathy for others will only grow. And I really hope that after reading these young adult books, I can recommend them to students and they can also gain the insight and experience and empathy that these characters go through. I am going to read the rest of Kim Johnson's books because this one was really, really good and I enjoyed it a lot. Next, I listened to Is This a Cry for Help by Emily Austen. I did a lot of audio reading this time around, which is totally fine because it's been great. Is This a Cry for Help is her latest novel. It just came out last month, and the only other Emily Austen book I read was last year, and it was Interesting Facts About Space, which I thought was meh. And then I do have her book, Every Day... Everyone in this room will someday be dead. Is This a Cry for Help follows our main character, Darcy, and she works at a public library. And this story is all about people trying to censor content in the library. Story that doesn't have like a ton of plot, but like the main plot is just that it's Darcy learning a lot about herself and what this backlash from the community is telling her about her own beliefs, which I find fascinating. She is tackling like a bunch of people. Think of like the Moms of Liberty sort of situation. A lot of people with traditional Christian values coming in and telling her that the content in the library doesn't align with their values, therefore it should be getting taken out. And so there is a lot of really wonderful commentary about intellectual freedom and providing access to things. It also touches on like what your socioeconomic status does compared to like libraries. It's like, should you only have access to certain information if you have the money to? There were a lot of interesting themes and discussions surrounding that. There was also a really well done depiction of grief. There were conversations between her and her therapist that kind of just added to the story in the context of that grief and everything too. It was very entertaining. I would recommend this to anybody who loves a literary fiction book where you're diving into the head of a character a bit more than following a straight to the point kind of plot. And the last two books we're going to talk about were my favorite two that I read in February, and probably two of my favorites that I've read this year so far. These are both 5-star books I'm about to talk about. I read James by Percival Everett. Oh my gosh, this book is so good. Full disclaimer, I never read Huck Finn. I never read it in school, and I was an English major in college, and I never read Huck Finn ever. But I now kind of want to go back and read it because I read James first, and I want to compare the two. But if you haven't read Huck Finn, you can still read James, and it's still amazing. It's this story of, Jim, aka James, going along on that adventure with Huck, and then they realize that they are missing what the other person is seeing. Like Huck doesn't understand all of the nuance that James has to deal with, like dumbing down his voice. He's actually very intelligent, but he can't show it. He has to be very respectful of people who don't even treat him like a human. All these sorts of things, and Huck has to kind of learn empathy in this way, but then there's like a real wonderful relationship and growth between the two as the series continues. And there is a lot of interesting thing that I didn't even know was going on back in the day either. Like there was like a point in the story where James joins like a dancing and singing troupe, and it would be white men who would go in blackface and do plays and skits. I didn't realize that was even a thing, It's all the things that you don't think about that are really important to have, and I loved this book. This book was an easy 5 stars. I am looking forward to buying my own copy and potentially reading it again and marking through it. It was so good. Like, if you haven't read it yet, please do. It was all over the place a couple of years ago, and I'm finally happy that I can join the discourse because, yes. And the final book for this wrap-up, I read a horror book, a horror arc even. It's scheduled to come out at the end of April. And oh my gosh, I was not expecting to love it as much as I did, but I was very happy with the end result. I read Molka by Monica Kim. And Monica Kim's debut novel was The Eyes Are the Best Part, which I gave like 4.25 stars last year. Really loved it. Like, if you actually want a story that's like female rage and a good for her in like the gnarliest way possible, that is Monica Kim. Please just read her books at this point. So, Monica Kim's story, Molka. Molka is actually a term used in Korea talking about like people putting spy cameras in public places and spying on women, like in restrooms and all these other places. And we follow our main character, and I think her name is Dae. And Dae is working for a company, and then she starts dating this boy, and he's famous and everything. And then they get caught in a Molka scandal. Now, that's not like spoiling too much because there's a lot of other stuff and nuanced things that go with this, but it gets very dark very quickly. The way that Monica Kim can write the unraveling of a character's mind and ideology, it's fascinating. There's also like a tiny bit of a supernatural element that comes into it that just made me so reminiscent of Bat Eater and Other Names for Cora Zhang. So like if you like that book, then you need to read Molka because Molka is that. And Molka is such like a timely thing right now, talking about like our privacy on the internet and our privacy in general with like the rise of technology, especially how women are treated in the media versus men. Yeah, she is like called all these terrible things and everything for wanting to have like intimacy relationships and things like that. But then boys like, oh, they need to have a squeaky clean reputation, all that sort of stuff that goes into it. Kind of like the thing where it's very purity culture-esque, honestly. And then the other interesting part about Molka is it's actually a dual POV. So we're following Dae in one, and then Jae-young in the other point of view. And he is a disgusting man who actually is one of the people putting up like the Molka cameras in his workplace. And he is just like the perfect embodiment of disgusting man who should know better but chooses to be ignorant instead. I really enjoyed this book. I actually waffled a little bit between if this one was my favorite or if James was my favorite, but I think James has to run away with it this time, and that's okay. Like, oh no, I had 5 stars? How dare. If we go back to the books that I want to read in 2026, I read 3 of the books on my list in 1 month. So I'm very happy about that. That was James, You'll Love It Here, and Molka. So 3 of the ones that I enjoyed were on my priority TBR list, so I can give a little check mark for that. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you for spending the beginning of the new year with me. I'm hoping to continue the pace that I'm going at while reading good books, and I hope to read some more manga this year too. I have kind of found that love back in me again. I am in the midst of moving pretty soon, so this might be one of the last videos you see with the green bookshelf, which is like really sad, but it doesn't fit in the room that it's going in our new house. So we'll have a new bookshelf eventually, but I'm also working on some cool side projects and stuff. So those will be in other videos. But if you made it to the end, leave me whatever emoji and comment you want down below. Subscribe if you're feeling it. And I will link my social medias as well as my Webtoons comic down below if you're interested in that. But I will see you in the next video. Bye!